Welcome to Stand Up for Doctors. I'm your host, Kim Downey. Thank you very much for joining us. I'd like to welcome Dr. Gretchen Rickards and Dr. Steve Sabo. Thanks for joining us today, Gretchen and Steve.
Thanks,
Nice to see you. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to see you both. And by way of a brief introduction, Gretchen is a physician, former residency program director, and now a leadership and transitions coach. And Steve is a retired ER physician, entrepreneur, and scientific advisory board member, building global distribution networks for a proactive wellness company. And that's a mouthful.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So today we'll be talking about things you wish you had known earlier in your careers as physicians and tips to make the journey more sustainable. So I think this is so important, and I know it's going to be a fantastic conversation. So as we get started, I always ask my guests what you'd like our audience to know about you as we begin our conversation. Steve, would you like to go first?
Sure. Obviously, we're not going in alphabetical order, but that's fine. Ladies first, but that's fine. Kim, Gretchen, you guys, you ladies know me. I worked as an emergency doctor for 28 years. And about a year or two, I realized that I needed to change. And so I've worked my way out of clinical medicine and into the role of a global entrepreneur. And what I would say to that is, and look, I look back and I think we talked about this, Gretchen. I was burnt out. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was burnt out. And so what I would say to everybody out there is that if you want to make a change, you can make a change. It's never too late to make a change. And gosh, I had a global Zoom this morning with people from Indonesia and Canada at 9 a.m. this morning doing a global Zoom. So, if you need to make a change, and we'll talk about some of this stuff, you can.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Steve. And Gretchen, what would you like us to know about you?
Well, thanks for the intro, and again for having us, Kim. As you mentioned, I'm an internist and also a leadership coach, but I wanted to share a little bit about myself personally. I'm also a mother of two school-aged girls, the wife of a fellow physician. I'm a military veteran, and personally, I'll enjoy things like I'm an avid reader, I'm an Orange Theory fitness enthusiast, and I do a lot of now volunteering in the community. But the main thing I wanted to share about me is really a little bit about my why, which first and foremost is my daughters and my family. But regarding my current work in coaching and still doing some medicine as well, is really that after a lot of my own introspection and experiencing burnout as well, like Steve, that really what really drives me is helping individuals reach their maximum personal and professional potential. And I love that I still get to do that every day. I help individual high achievers across professions, but really the heart and what I enjoy the most is that I still get to do that and work with a lot of physicians across all spectrums of their career journey, which is really wonderful. And I also hope that through my leadership coaching to be able to help change the culture of medicine, one leader or future leader at a time.
Well, thank you. I love that. And I should mention that I've had you on before as part of our improv episode. And I feel like that is a great segue to, as we're talking about things you wish you would known earlier in your careers. And one of them I believe you wish to speak to is letting go of perfectionism. And I think improv can actually help with that, right?
That's right, for sure. Yeah, letting go of perfectionism has been is probably one of the biggest things that I wish I had known earlier. That kind of that need to be perfect all the time can be damaging. It leads to kind of the inability to take risks and kind of do things outside of your comfort zone. So that is definitely one of the things that I wish, kind of letting go of that drive to be perfect all the time, and taming that has been a real important part of my journey.
And would you like to relate that? You shared that you had a paralyzing fear of posting and commenting on the internet.
Yes, I'm happy to share that. Actually, it's kind of how Steve and I know each other. Prior to actually, I'd say January of this year, I truly had a paralyzing fear of posting on the internet, and commenting and posting. And so I knew that I needed some accountability around that, and had done a little bit of research and found the group called SoMe Docs, Doctors on Social Media. And within that, there's an accountability group for social media posting. And so I joined that group, and that's how Stephen and I know each other. But it really worked that out very quickly, because the requirement at the time was to post and comment 5 times a week. And so I got over that fear really quickly. But it's also been so joyful, because through So Many Docs, there's really been such a sense of community. And I feel, even though I don't see Steve all the time, I feel like I know him very well, because I read and comment on his posts all the time. And I'm really grateful, Kim, that that's how we were connected as well, through LinkedIn.
Well, that's fantastic. So I've been on LinkedIn like a year, since April, and that's how I've connected with just about all the physicians that I have. And interestingly enough, I had maybe separately connected with some of the doctors that were kind of in that accountability group at the time. So even though I'm not a doctor and I wasn't officially in it, I felt like a tag along or something, and I started commenting on all of their posts, and then that group evolved over time. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's how because I don't remember exactly, I'd have to look back how I connected with either or both of you, might have been through that and through that group. So, and I've had Donna Coriel on here, and I'm a huge fan of SoMe Doc. So thank you for sharing. And Steve, would you like to speak to anything related to letting go of perfectionism, or just adding something of your own that you wished you had known earlier in your career?
No, well, first of all, Gretchen, what you didn't tell them is that if you didn't post 5 times a week, you'd get kicked out of the group.
Yes, that's true.
So it was kind of peer pressure. And so we put that on you. So I think we'll take some of the credit for you getting over that fear.
I appreciate that very much.
Sure. And I do feel like I've known you, and from your comments, and I think there are a few of us that seem to post almost every day. And I try to post 7 days a week, and not only on LinkedIn, but Instagram and Facebook as well. And I use that in my business. But in regard to your point here, what I would say is similar to that, and I have that written down in this discussion, is that I think I always thought at the beginning of my career that I had to make the diagnosis. So you'd come in, you'd see me as an emergency doctor, and and I would have to make the diagnosis for you. But what I've learned over the years is that's not my job. My job is to help you with your pain or your injury or your problem, whether that's stabilize you and find a specialist to take care of the ultimate problem, or to make sure that you're stable and discharge you to the appropriate dermatologist or internist or OB, whoever it is that I believe best can get the answer for you if I'm not able to find that. And early in the career, I felt that I had to make that diagnosis, I guess, if that makes sense. And I think that's aligns to what you're talking about, Gretchen.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I often say that I think ER physicians and internists are some of the coolest, because you can either figure everything out or you know the next step. And that, I think, is an important distinction. So you don't have to know everything, and you don't have to figure it all out. You just need, like you said, to stabilize the patient and figure out what's the next step. And you're very well trained to do that. So if I was on a desert island, well, at this point, I'd have to pick my nephrologist, because he orders the medications to keep me alive. But past that, or if I could have a triumvirate of doctors, it would probably be a nephrologist, an internist, and an ER doctor. Between the three of you, you can keep me alive for a long time. So Gretchen, we also talked about that you might want to speak to enmeshment during a career as a physician, and the process that you've spent de-unmeshing. enmeshing.
Yeah. So,
Mm.
part of that idea of investment is kind of has to do with when your career and your personal identity become completely intertwined. And the risk of that is obviously it puts you at very high risk of burnout and other issues. And so, a big part of my journey and what I've learned along the way is the importance of that sort of I'm not sure if that's a word, but de-enmeshing and trying to find and identify who I am outside of medicine. So it's kind of intentional now when I introduce myself. I don't lead, or actually, you'll see even on LinkedIn, I don't lead with MD because that's not it's not a huge part of my coaching business, or it is, but it's not where I lead. But also, whenever I introduce myself, I try to include all the other aspects of myself besides just my profession. And that's been a big part of my healing journey, or sort of journey and kind of working through that. Other things that can be really helpful in that is really getting clear about what your values are, what's really important to you, and doing things in alignment with that outside of work, as well as carving out time and taking up new hobbies and carving out time for interests outside of medicine.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's so important. And I think people that aren't in medicine wouldn't understand because as I've gotten involved in these spaces and I've heard so many doctors talk about it was always the next thing, getting into medical school, getting into residency, getting a good fellowship, getting the job. And then once they're an attending, they're like, wait a minute, is this all there is? Going from room to room for the rest of my life. And some people wouldn't understand that. They'd be like, oh my God, but you're a doctor, right? But if they were used to chasing goals and then you're kind of like, well, now is this it? Or they feel like I'm just a doctor, right? And that to be a noble doctor, that they shouldn't pursue things, non-doctor things. So, Steve, would you like to speak to that?
Sure. I always, and remember, I didn't have call because as an emergency doctor, you have shifts,
Mm-hmm.
8, 12, mostly 12-hour shifts. I mean, Gretchen, I mean, obviously you took call and you had night call and weekend call. We worked nights and weekends, but it was, when you're there, when you're not. And I always, early in my career, liked that aspect of being an emergency doctor. So I always tried to avoid medicine and the hospital when I wasn't in the hospital. And it was pretty easy to do. Now, I was an administrator and assistant director the first couple of years of my practice. So that obviously was different. But so I think it's important to do that as much as you can, is to like you said, Gretchen, to separate the work and the family life. And when and so in that sense it was kind of, I think, probably easier for me to do that. And I also, I never brought stuff home. At least I tried not to. At the end, when I look back on it, that I was getting burnt out, the night shifts, the weekends, more the night shifts. Um, what I tell people is my last couple years. So there was obviously the COVID epidemic, and I was in New York, and it was really a terrible thing to have to deal with. But I still tried not to bring it home. And during that time, I was paid by the hospital. I wasn't taking vacation. And so I had extra vacation days, and I found some of the night people. We had some full-time night people who wanted extra shifts. So I was only doing 1 or 2 shifts a month, and I actually was giving them away and taking holiday time or PTO, paid time off. And so for 14 months in a row during the pandemic, I didn't do a night shift.
Mm.
I slept better.
Mm.
I My mood was better. And then that ended when not necessarily, well, it was after the pandemic, but it ended when one or both of the night people really didn't want to do more than one. And so in those last 6 months that I was in practice, I was doing night shifts again. And that's when we looked at moving to Florida, which I did. And yeah, so work-life balance was the topic, and so important, very important.
Mhm.
Can I just thanks
Mhm.
Steve for sharing that. I couldn't agree more. Two things I wanted to say. One is just to close out the enmeshment. The biggest risk there, if your identity and work are totally intertwined, is that it really does set you up for kind of a painful identity crisis if you do go through something like burnout or when it comes time to retire and things like that. But tagging on, Steve, to what you said, I agree. That was kind of one of my biggest lessons learned along the way as well. What I wish I'd done earlier is really learn the importance of healthy boundaries, work-life boundaries, exactly what you did, not taking work home,
Mhm.
not kind of, taking on all the extra shifts and doing all the extra things because I learned far too late the importance of kind of having those healthy boundaries.
Mm.
And let me follow up. I feel like it's a debate here, going back and forth. No, let me follow up. Now, you're married to a physician, correct?
Yes.
So I imagine, I don't know, there are medical discussions. My wife is not in the medical field. God bless her. And my two girls, probably would, well, one of them would faint at the sight of blood. The other one had no interest in medicine. They do marketing and that's fine. And so, yeah, we didn't talk about that, stuff at the dinner table, unless I had something that I felt like I just wanted to get off my chest. I might say it to my wife, tone down the gore or whatever, and we see some horrible stuff. If I met someone interesting, but in general, yeah, I didn't do that.
Mm.
I think that's great. And to that point, like you said, it's a little bit different on that internal medicine side, but it's very easy to bring charts home or, like you said, to pick
Hmm.
up extra shifts or do these things. And so I would think about, if I were much earlier in career, like making much firmer boundaries, things like not bringing charts home, whatever has to happen
Hmm.
to do that, or having a strict time of leaving work. Again, some of my clients have just said, like, I have stopped picking up extra shifts, draw the boundary there. Or one that was big for me as a leader was taking email off my phone. I found that was incredibly stressful to me during COVID in particular, to be connected to work all the time. So, whatever that looks like, but thinking about setting healthy boundaries early and often.
And just another thing about the charts, that's a point that I wanted to make too. As an emergency doctor, you can see it. It's a lot of it is about how many patients can you see in your shift. And you know what? If you don't write up or now it's type up the charts, by the end of the shift, you can see a lot more patients. But one thing I learned years ago, actually in my first job in New Jersey, that was the time, if you remember, that we had this full sheet of paper. Half of it was the patient identification stuff, and the other half, knock yourself out. That was your whole chart.
Mm.
And so there were shifts that I found out in the single coverage ED that the end of the shift, and I'd look to my right and the stack of charts would be there. And I'd have to stay an hour or two after to do charts and not getting paid for that. And so I learned early enough that if I did see a bunch of patients, that I would make sure those charts were typed up and I would leave as close to on time as possible. In my last job, they didn't pay me for extra time, and none of the jobs would pay you extra to type charts up. So I used to tell other people, don't stay late, finish your charts up, and make sure you get out on time. You're not reimbursed for time after.
Yep.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I just want to stop and to thank you both for all the sacrifices that you've made in your life and that all doctors have made in their lives. And I think people don't stop to appreciate that. The things that you've missed, the family events, the shifts, the sleep, all of those things. And then to be practicing during COVID, I've had twice a local pulmonologist on here, Dr. Jose Mendez. He had patient zero in Connecticut. He was on the phone with Italy. And then we didn't know anything about the virus. He separated from his family for 6 months. He stayed in his basement and didn't see, his wife or his family for like 6 months. And it's just the sacrifices that you all have made is people need to appreciate that. So, just a moment of gratitude from a grateful patient. And thank you for sharing your, stories of, and enmeshment, and how you were able to, separate yourselves a bit from that. These stories are important to share. And one other thing that you wish to speak to, Gretchen, is the power of asking for help. And that is so important. So if you'd like to speak a bit to that and to safe haven.
Yeah, so I I just wanted, I mean, I think probably my biggest lesson learned, and if there was one of the biggest things I would have done differently, is realizing the power of asking for help. And I say that as someone who was, as a program director, I was very aware of the tools and resources that we had available. I really didn't have confidentiality concerns, but I was really struggling sort of mid-pandemic. And I'm thankful that during that time, but I still didn't ask for help. I still kind of, we as physicians, I think so often our coping strategy is just to put your head down and keep working harder. I've just got to push through this. And like those old strategies just were not working anymore. But I'm thankful that during that time, my husband told me I was not doing well, and suggested that I actually try physician coaching. He had tried that through Vital Work Life, which is a employee assistance program that my institution has, and is actually specifically designed for healthcare organizations throughout the country. So that was really, I'm so grateful, because that, and I went originally for work-life balance and boundaries, but that really became the sort of gateway to my own wellness journey. And I'm so grateful for that. And so I can't speak highly enough. Through that, I got one-on-one coaching. I ended up getting involved in counseling, both of which I've done now ongoing for the last 2 years. My husband and I have done parenting coaching, which completely changed the dynamics in our house. And so it was just my biggest lesson learned. And I don't know, is this the right time, Kim, then to maybe talk about?
Sure.
So I just wanted to put in, I'm so honored to say that now I actually am a coach for Vital Work Life, which is an amazing set of tools. And they're also the engine for an organization called Safe Haven. And so Safe Haven is an opportunity. It's both the Medical Society of Virginia, a collaboration between the Medical Society of Virginia and Vital Work Life, to provide confidential tools and resources for healthcare providers, which isn't just doctors, it also includes nurses, pharmacists, and medical students. And so if you live in a handful of states, which I want to get at my fingertips, but it includes Minnesota, I don't have it at my fingertips, Minnesota, Arizona, and so there's at least 5 or 6 different states, as well as certain organizations like the Society of Anesthesiology, ASCO. If you're a member of those organizations, for just a few $100s, you have access to all the same tools, which includes 6 one-on-one coaching sessions per incident. So it's not even per year, it's per issue that comes up. 6 free counseling sessions, there's leadership coaching, there's a concierge service, so you can, I planned a kid's birthday party through that. So there's all kinds of resources, but I think it's just the bottom line message of this is just, one, the importance of asking for help, but also knowing what resources are available to you. I know at that time I was not in a place where I would have invested the time or money to take care of myself. And so that low barrier to entry and having free resources was important. So the one piece of advice I would give is to first start and look and see what's available at your own institution. And if not available there, see if you might even be available, look at other resources like Safe Haven.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that. And people seem to know that I'm doing this because my own doctor took his life, and it was actually 2 years ago today. So this is a very, painful day for me. And just the opportunities to ask for help. I become a ambassador for the Dr. Lorna Breen Heroes Foundation, and they're working on, on Safe Haven as well, to make sure that there's those free and confidential resources for healthcare workers in every state, and also to remove the intrusive questions. And so thank you for your work with that. It's critically important. And Steve, if there's anything you'd like to say in response, or also anything else you'd like to share that you wish you had known earlier in your career, or tips to make the journey more sustainable. in
Sure.
medicine.
So as I said, I was certainly burnt out at the end of my career, but one thing I'm thankful is that I started looking for my plan B quite a few years ago. I really wish I actually started looking even earlier. I tried my hand at some entrepreneurial endeavors, thinking that I wanted to do something part-time now and learn some skills so that when I realized it was time to move on from medicine, that I would be ready. And I didn't have, a specific path, except I knew it would be in wellness. I didn't have a specific company that I knew I wanted to join. I come from a family of doctors. My brother's a neurosurgeon. He's a few years younger than me, and I'm sure that he'll retire as a neurosurgeon, and that's certainly great. And my father's a retired thoracic surgeon, and he's retired. Actually, we're fortunate enough to have moved down here close to them in Florida. And he did, what was a doctor his whole career. And so it was interesting when I told my parents that I was moving on from clinical medicine last year, that I had resigned from the hospital. They were like, "Why? Your father worked his whole career as a doctor." And I'm like, well, and he noticed, knows that medicine is different these days. And so what I'd like to say to everybody is that there's help, as Gretchen was saying, there's help out for you if you're not happy or you're not or you're burnt out. There's help for you that may lead you on the path to becoming happier in clinical medicine. If you decide that you don't want to do clinical medicine, I found, an opportunity, and I would tell you that my blinders are open. So, people come with opportunities, and I listen to them. I've started a business that I love with proactive wellness and anti-aging, and we now have the world's first neurocosmetic, and I'm on the scientific board of the company, so I get to design products, and I speak to lots of doctors and see where they're at and see if they might be looking for something, and if what I have might be what they're looking for. And if not, I mean, Gretchen and I spoke, and we're friends now, and I think we learn from each other from our posts every day. And yeah, just to let people know that there are options.
And that's great. And I also think it's important that we do find ways to make medicine more sustainable, because we do need doctors.
We do.
And
Oh,
I've become involved with Medicine Forward and the Healthcare Reinvention Collaborative to find ways that we're going to improve the healthcare system to make it more sustainable for everyone, physicians and other healthcare workers. And so Gretchen, you're still continuing a bit of clinical.
I do. Yep. I'm part-time clinical, so still very involved in that world, and still involved in teaching, which I love. And so, yeah, I think to Stephen's point, I think a couple of things there. One, I think what he speaks to is a lot about the importance of being true to yourself, but also realizing that clinical medicine is one way that you can be a doctor, and that a career can look a lot of different ways. And so as trainees, I take opportunities to learn about all the different ways that you can be a doctor. I mean, I think including now, I think that's one of the challenges of our healthcare system and training system is, for instance, in internal medicine, you learn a lot about inpatient care and outpatient care, but there's a lot of different care models now, including telemedicine and direct care and things like that. And so there's a lot of ways that even just you can do clinical care differently. And I think it's only going to continue to change and morph. So take opportunities to learn, the different ways that you can use your career, or, take
Yeah.
your career, navigate your career.
Right, that's a great point.
oh.
Go ahead. Were there any final words you wish to share, Steve?
Yeah, and so for those of you who might be in the boat, so to speak, that we're talking about, just realize, I mean, myself, I had a passion since I was 5 years old. And I remember at Kings County Hospital in Brooklyn, running up the steps and hugging this man with a white coat, because I thought my father was the only person who wore a white coat. And it wasn't my father.
Mm.
But I idolized him, still too, so much. that was my passion my whole life. And just realize that your passion may change. And there's nothing wrong with that. You just need to recognize it and go where your passion is.
Yeah, I love that. That's very important. Thanks for sharing that. Were there any final parting words you wish to share, Gretchen?
No, just, I think that medicine is still such an incredibly noble profession. And I think that finding ways to find balance and kind of maintain your identity and authenticity is a real important part of, and seeking care and taking care of yourself is a real important way to make it sustainable, but also to role model those things for the next generation.
Well, thank you very much. And I love it too, because every single story we share, there's going to be some doctor sometime that sees a little bit or hears a little bit that's going to resonate with them, that'll make them think, a little more openly or take a step to do something. So when you all share your stories, it's just so important and so inspiring. So thank you very much for being my guest today. And how can our listeners get in touch with you, Steve?
Sure. I am on Instagram. It's dr.Steve Sabo. And I am on if you Google LinkedIn and Dr. Steve Sabo and Facebook Dr. Steve Sabo, you'll find me.
Okay, excellent. And how about you, Gretchen?
So easiest is probably my webpage is www.gretchenrickards.com. So it's Rickards. And then similarly on LinkedIn, I'm on there. I'm the only one with that name, so it should come up.
Okay, fantastic. So in closing, to move the needle in healthcare, we all need to raise our voices and we all need to care about each other. We already know that doctors need to care about patients. Patients need to care about doctors too. So stand up, doctors, and let's stand up for doctors.